The winds kicked up dust across the main street of Silver Creek as Beckham Wells rode into town. His weathered hat pulled low against the harsh New Mexico sun of 1875. 10 years had passed since he'd last set foot in this place, 10 years since he'd last heard her laugh, seen her smile, or spoken her name. Rebecca Ann Mitchell. Even thinking it now caused his heart to twist painfully in his chest. The town had grown since he'd left. New storefronts lined the street, and the saloon had been rebuilt after the fire of '68. Beck dismounted from his chestnut mare, tying her to the hitching post outside the general store. His boots struck the wooden boardwalk with a hollow thud as he paused, gathering his courage before pushing through the door. A small bell jingled overhead, announcing his arrival. The shopkeeper, an older man Beck didn't recognize, looked up from his ledger. "Afternoon, stranger. What can I help you with today?" "Just passing through," Beck replied, his voice rough from trail dust. "Need some supplies." As he moved through the store, memories flooded back of a young girl with fiery red hair who used to help her father run this very shop. Mr. Mitchell had been the previous owner, but there was no sign of the family now. "You wouldn't happen to know the Mitchells, would you?" Beck asked casually, placing a sack of coffee beans on the counter. "Used to own this place back before the war." The shopkeeper stroked his gray beard. "Mitchell." "Sure. Old man Mitchell passed on about 5 years back. His daughter took over for a spell, then sold it to me when she moved out to the Hanson place." Beck's pulse quickened. "Rebecca Mitchell. That's right. Pretty woman, hair red as sunset. Widowed now, poor thing. Her husband died in that mining accident 2 winters ago. She's running the ranch on her own with just her boy to help." The information hit Beck like a physical blow. Rebecca, widowed, with a son. The life she'd built without him stretched before his mind's eye, years of joy and sorrow he hadn't been part of. "The Hanson place," Beck repeated, his mind already mapping the route. "That's about 5 miles west of here, isn't it?" "4 if you cut through Miller's Creek," the shopkeeper replied, eyeing Beck with newfound interest. "You know the Mitchells?" Beck paid for his supplies, ignoring the question. "Much obliged." Outside, he stood for a long moment in the harsh sunlight, contemplating his next move. He'd come back to Silver Creek to settle some unfinished business with the railroad company, not to reopen old wounds. Yet the pull to see her again was undeniable. Beck swung into his saddle, turning his horse west. He told himself he was just going to ride by, maybe catch a glimpse from a distance. Nothing more. The trail to the Hanson place wound through rolling hills dotted with scrub brush and the occasional juniper. As he crested the final rise, the ranch came into view, a modest 2-story house with a large barn and corral. Several horses grazed in a fenced pasture, and smoke rose from the chimney. Beck dismounted at the edge of the property, tethering his horse to a fence post. He'd almost convinced himself to turn back when he saw her. Rebecca stepped onto the front porch, shaking out a rug. Her hair was still that brilliant copper red, though she wore it up now, a few tendrils escaping to frame her face. She was thinner than he remembered, but her movements held the same grace that had captivated him when they were both barely more than children. A boy of perhaps 8 or 9 ran from around the side of the house, calling something Beck couldn't hear. Rebecca's face transformed as she smiled at her son, the years falling away, revealing the girl Beck had once known. He shouldn't be here. This was a mistake. He turned to leave when his horse nickered loudly, betraying his presence. Rebecca's head snapped up, her eyes scanning the property's edge until they found him. Even from this distance, Beck could see her body go still. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, as if drawn by some invisible force, Beck began walking toward the house. His legs felt wooden beneath him, his heart hammering against his ribs. When he reached the yard, he stopped, removing his hat. Rebecca hadn't moved from the porch, one hand gripping the railing so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "Beck," she whispered, the name falling from her lips like a prayer or a curse, he couldn't tell which. "Rebecca," he replied, her name catching in his throat. 10 years of silence shattered with that single word. The boy moved closer to his mother, looking between the 2 adults with confusion. "Mama?" he questioned, tugging at Rebecca's skirt. Rebecca's eyes never left Beck's face. "Bobby, go inside and finish your lessons." "But Mama, now, please." The boy frowned but obeyed, disappearing into the house with one last curious glance at the stranger. When they were alone, Rebecca descended the porch steps slowly, as if approaching a wild animal that might bolt. She stopped several feet away from him, close enough that he could see the faint freckles across her nose and the small scar above her right eyebrow acquired in their years apart. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steadier now. "Railroad business," he replied. "I heard you were here. I thought—" What had he thought? That she'd welcome him with open arms after he'd abandoned her. "I don't know what I thought." Rebecca crossed her arms, a shield against him or her own emotions. "It's been 10 years, Beckham Wells. 10 years without a word. I know." There was no excuse he could offer that would be enough. "I'm sorry." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Sorry, you're sorry." She shook her head. "Do you have any idea what happened after you left? What I went through?" "No," he admitted. "But I'd like to know if you'll tell me." Rebecca studied him for a long moment, her green eyes cataloging the changes in him, the new lines around his eyes, the scar that ran along his jaw, the harder set to his mouth. "You should go," she finally said, turning away. "There's nothing for you here." "Becky," he called, the old nickname slipping out before he could stop it. She froze, her back to him, shoulders tense. "Just tell me you're happy. That's all I need to know, and I'll ride out of here and never trouble you again." Rebecca turned back slowly, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Am I happy?" she repeated. "I have my son, I have this land, I've made a life here." She paused. "But you don't get to ask me that, not after all this time." Beck nodded, accepting her anger as his due. He replaced his hat. "I understand, I'll go." "Why did you leave?" The question burst from her suddenly, as if she couldn't contain it. "You promised me you'd come back. We were going to be married." The pain in her voice cut through him sharper than any knife. "I meant to come back, I swear I did." "Then why didn't you?" How could he explain the shame that had kept him away? The failure he'd become after the war, the man unworthy of her love. "I wasn't the same man who left," he said finally. "The war, it changed me. I didn't think you'd want what came back." "That wasn't your decision to make," she countered, anger flashing in her eyes. "You didn't even give me a chance." Before Beck could respond, the front door opened and the boy Bobby poked his head out. "Mama, someone's coming." Beck turned to see a cloud of dust approaching from the direction of town. 3 riders, moving fast. Rebecca's face paled. "Bobby, go inside. Bar the door and don't come out until I tell you." The boy disappeared again, and Rebecca hurried to the porch, reaching beneath a bench to pull out a shotgun. "What's going on?" Beck asked, alarmed by her reaction. "Trouble," she replied grimly. "If you're going to leave, now would be the time." But Beck was already moving to stand beside her, drawing his revolver. "Who are they?" "Warren Blackwood and his men. He wants this land for the water rights. He's been trying to run me off since Thomas died." The riders approached rapidly, slowing only when they reached the yard. Beck recognized the type, immediately hired guns with hard eyes and trigger fingers that itched for an excuse. The man in the center, presumably Blackwood, was older, with a silver mustache and expensive clothes that set him apart from his companions. His eyes narrowed when he spotted Beck. "Mrs. Hanson," Blackwood called, his voice falsely cordial. "I see you have company today." "State your business, Blackwood," Rebecca called back, the shotgun steady in her hands. "Same as always, my dear. I've come with a new offer for your property, double what I offered last month." His gaze shifted to Beck. "And who might this be?" Beck stepped forward. "Name's Beckham Wells." Recognition flickered in Blackwood's eyes. "Wells, the railroad man." "That's right." Blackwood's demeanor changed subtly. "Interesting company you're keeping, Mrs. Hanson. Did you know your friend here works for the very railroad that's buying up land all through this territory?" Rebecca's gaze darted to Beck, confusion and betrayal clouding her features. "I'm here on personal business," Beck stated firmly. "Nothing to do with the railroad." Blackwood smiled unpleasantly. "Is that so? Well, perhaps we should discuss this another time when you're not otherwise engaged." He tipped his hat mockingly. "Mrs. Hanson, my offer stands. Think carefully about your situation. A woman alone can't hold on to land like this forever." With that, he turned his horse, his men following suit. They rode away at a more leisurely pace than they'd arrived, confident in their power to return whenever they wished. When they were out of sight, Rebecca lowered the shotgun, turning to Beck with accusing eyes. The railroad. You're working for the railroad that's forcing people off their land. It's not like that, Beck said. I'm a surveyor. I map routes, that's all. Routes for a railroad that's destroying people's lives, she countered. Did you come here to scout my land too? Is that what this is about? No. Beck stepped toward her, stopping when she raised the shotgun slightly. Rebecca, I swear to you, I had no idea you were here until today. I came to Silver Creek on business, yes, but coming to see you was. He struggled for the words. I just needed to see you again. She searched his face, looking for the truth. Something of what she saw must have convinced her, because she lowered the weapon completely. You should go, she said, the fight draining from her voice. Bobby will be frightened, Beck nodded, knowing he'd worn out his welcome. Blackwood seems dangerous. You shouldn't be out here alone. A flash of her old spirit returned. I've managed for 2 years without your concern, Beck. I'll continue to do so. He backed away, hands raised in surrender. At least let me check on you tomorrow. Make sure Blackwood doesn't return. Rebecca hesitated, then gave a curt nod. If you must. It wasn't much, but it was something, a reason to see her again to try to explain what he couldn't today. Beck mounted his horse, taking one last look at her standing on the porch, proud and defiant despite everything. Tomorrow then, he called. Tomorrow, she agreed, before disappearing into the house. Beck rode away, his mind churning with all that had happened. He'd found her, spoken her name after all these years, but the gulf between them seemed wider than ever. As night fell, Beck made camp near Miller's Creek, his thoughts too tangled for sleep. The years he'd spent away played through his mind like scenes from someone else's life. After the war, he'd drifted west, taking whatever work he could find. The nightmares had followed him, visions of battlefields strewn with bodies, the faces of men he'd killed staring accusingly. How could he have brought that darkness back to Rebecca? So he'd stayed away, telling himself it was for her own good. Then one job led to another, and eventually he'd found steady work with the railroad. The years passed, and the memory of her became both a comfort and a torment. Now, knowing she'd married another man, had a child, built a life without him, it hurt more than he'd expected. Yet seeing her in danger stirred something in him he thought long dead. A need to protect, to make things right. Tomorrow, he'd try again. Tomorrow, he'd find the words to bridge the gap between them. Dawn broke clear and cool over the Hanson ranch. Rebecca had been awake for hours, sleep eluding her as memories of Beck's return played endlessly through her mind. She moved mechanically through her morning chores, feeding the chickens, milking the cow, preparing breakfast for Bobby. Her son watched her with curious eyes over his plate of eggs and biscuits. Who was that man yesterday, Mama? He finally asked. Rebecca sat across from him, cradling her coffee cup. Someone I knew a long time ago, before I was born. Yes, before I met your father. Bobby considered this. He looked like one of those men in your stories, the ones who fight outlaws and Indians. Despite herself, Rebecca smiled. He was never quite that exciting. Is he coming back? The question hung in the air between them. He might stop by today, she admitted, but he'll be leaving town soon. Bobby nodded, accepting this with a child's simplicity. Can I show him my horse? Rebecca's heart clenched. How easily children made connections, offered trust. We'll see, she said, rising to clear the dishes. Now finish up. You've got chores to do before lessons. As Bobby raced outside, Rebecca moved to the window, her eyes scanning the horizon. She told herself she wasn't looking for him, but the lie didn't hold. Seeing Beck again had unleashed a flood of emotions she'd thought long buried. Anger at his abandonment, certainly. But beneath that lurked more dangerous feelings, the quickening of her pulse when he'd spoken her name, the memories of young love that had never fully faded. Thomas had been a good husband, kind, steady, hardworking. She'd grown to love him in her own way, though never with the wild passion she'd felt for Beck. When Thomas died in the mine collapse, she'd mourned him sincerely, more for Bobby's sake than her own. The sound of approaching hoofbeats pulled her from her thoughts. She smoothed her hair reflexively, then chided herself for the gesture. Beck's opinion of her appearance shouldn't matter now. She stepped onto the porch as he rode into the yard. He looked different in the morning light, more substantial somehow, less like a ghost from her past. Beck dismounted, leading his horse to the water trough. "Morning," he called, his voice carefully neutral. "Good morning," she replied, equally cautious. He approached the porch, hat in hand. "No sign of Blackwood or his men on my ride-in." "They'll be back," Rebecca said. "They always are." Bobby came running from the barn, slowing when he spotted Beck. He approached with a child's curious mix of caution and boldness. "Hello," he said, standing beside his mother. Beck crouched to the boy's level. "Hello there, you must be Bobby. I'm Beck. Are you really a railroad man?" Bobby asked. Beck smiled, the expression transforming his face, reminding Rebecca of the boy she'd once known. "I am. I help figure out where the tracks should go." "Have you ever been in a train robbery, Bobby?" Rebecca admonished. Beck laughed. "No train robberies. But I did once have to outrun a buffalo stampede while surveying in Kansas." Bobby's eyes widened. "Really, really. Nearly didn't make it, but my horse was faster than she looked." As Beck entertained Bobby with the tale, Rebecca watched them together, an ache forming in her chest. This was what might have been Beck telling stories to their child, the three of them a family. "Bobby," she interrupted gently, "would you go collect the eggs, please? I need to speak with Mr. Wells." The boy looked disappointed but nodded. "Can I show him my horse after?" Beck answered before Rebecca could. "I'd like that very much." When Bobby had gone, an awkward silence fell between them. Beck stood, replacing his hat. "You have a fine son," he said. "Thank you. He's everything to me." Beck nodded, understanding. "Rebecca, about yesterday." "I need to explain about the railroad." She crossed her arms. "You don't owe me any explanations, Beck. What you do is your business. I want you to understand. I'm not here to take your land or anyone else's. The route I'm surveying doesn't come anywhere near your property. But it does cross other people's land, people who don't want to sell." Beck sighed. "Yes, that's true, but progress is coming whether we like it or not. The railroad means prosperity for towns like Silver Creek. And wealth for men like Blackwood," she countered. "Men like Blackwood would find ways to take what they want with or without the railroad," Beck argued. "At least this way there's compensation, jobs for those who need them." Rebecca shook her head. "You've changed more than I thought," the words stung. "We've both changed, Rebecca." 10 years is a long time. She couldn't argue with that. They stood in silence, the weight of those lost years between them. "Why did you really come back?" she finally asked, the question that had kept her awake all night. The truth this time. Beck's eyes met hers, direct and unwavering. "I came for the railroad job, but when I heard you were here, I needed to see you, to know if what I felt all those years ago was real or just a young man's fantasy." "And," she pressed, her heart racing, "it was real," he said simply, "more real than anything else in my life." Rebecca turned away, unable to face the emotion in his eyes. "It doesn't matter now. Too much has happened." "I know I hurt you," Beck said, moving closer. "I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I'm asking anyway. Give me a chance to explain, to make things right between us." "There is no right, Beck. You left me waiting at the church. You never sent word, not even to tell me you were alive." The pain in her voice cut through him. "I know, and I'll regret that until the day I die." Rebecca faced him again, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Do you have any idea what it was like, the humiliation? Everyone in town pitying poor Rebecca Mitchell, abandoned at the altar. My father had to sell the store because business dropped off. No one wanted to face us after what happened." Beck blanched. "I didn't know. How could you? You were gone." She drew a steadying breath. "I married Thomas a year later. He was kind, steady. He offered security when we had nothing left." "Did you love him?" The question escaped before Beck could stop it. Rebecca's gaze hardened. "That's not a question you have the right to ask." "You're right, I'm sorry." Before either could speak again, the sound of a wagon approaching drew their attention. A young woman with dark hair pulled up in front of the house, waving cheerfully. "Rebecca, I brought those preserves I promised," she called, climbing down from the wagon. Rebecca forced a smile. "Sarah, good morning. This is an old acquaintance of mine, Beckham Wells. Beck, this is Sarah Donovan, our nearest neighbor." Sarah's eyebrows rose as she looked between them. "Wells, not the Beck you used to." She trailed off at Rebecca's warning look. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Donovan," Beck said, tipping his hat. "Miss," she corrected with a smile. "Never married." Her gaze turned speculative. "Are you staying in these parts long, Mr. Wells?" Just passing through on business, he replied. Railroad business, I hear, Sarah said. The whole town's talking about it. And about your return. She gave Rebecca a meaningful look. Rebecca cleared her throat. Sarah, would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot. That would be lovely. As the women headed inside, Beck caught Rebecca's arm gently. When can I see you again? We need to finish our conversation. Rebecca hesitated. Come for supper, 6 o'clock. Bobby would like to show you his horse, and we do need to talk. Relief washed over Beck. I'll be here. She nodded, then followed her friend into the house, leaving Beck standing in the yard with a flicker of hope he hardly dared acknowledge. Beck spent the day in Silver Creek, finalizing his survey reports at the hotel that served as his temporary office. His mind kept drifting to Rebecca and their upcoming dinner, making it difficult to concentrate on the work at hand. Around midday, a commotion in the street drew his attention. Looking out the window, he saw Warren Blackwood and his men emerging from the bank, looking pleased with themselves. As Blackwood mounted his horse, his gaze drifted to the hotel, locking with Beck's for a moment. The older man smiled coldly before riding away. Uneasy, Beck gathered his papers and headed for the bank. The manager, a nervous man named Harris, seemed reluctant to speak with him. Mr. Blackwood is an important client, Harris explained, adjusting his spectacles. I can't discuss his business affairs. I'm not asking about his affairs, Beck pressed. I'm asking about his interest in the Hanson property, Harris sighed. It's no secret he wants that land. The creek that runs through it is the most reliable water source for miles. Whoever controls it controls all the surrounding grazing land. And the railroad would pay handsomely for access to that water for its steam engines, Beck concluded. Harris nodded reluctantly. Mr. Blackwood has been quite vocal about his plans to sell to your company once he acquires the property. Mrs. Hanson doesn't want to sell. She's refused every offer, even when. Harris trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Even when what? Beck demanded. Even when things began happening. Fences cut, cattle driven off, that sort of thing. Nothing that could be proven, of course. Beck's jaw tightened. I see. Thank you for your time, Mr. Harris. Outside, Beck headed for the sheriff's office, finding a young deputy manning the desk. Sheriff Thompson's out of town until tomorrow, the deputy explained. Something I can help you with. I'm concerned about the Hanson Ranch, Beck said. There have been incidents, and I believe Warren Blackwood may be behind them. The deputy looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Hanson has filed complaints, but without proof. He shrugged. Mr. Blackwood is an important man in these parts, important enough to be above the law, the deputy flushed. That's not what I said. Sheriff Thompson has promised to look into it when he returns. Beck left, frustration building. It was clear Rebecca wouldn't get help from the town authorities. Blackwood had too much influence. As evening approached, Beck rode back to the Hanson Ranch, alert for any sign of trouble. The property looked peaceful in the golden light of sunset, smoke rising from the chimney, chickens pecking in the yard. Rebecca met him at the door, dressed in a simple blue dress that brought out the green of her eyes. Her hair was arranged more carefully than it had been that morning, a few copper tendrils framing her face. You came, she said, as if she'd half expected him not to. I said I would. She nodded, stepping aside to let him enter. The house was modest but welcoming, with handmade quilts adding color to the practical furniture. Beck caught the scent of beef stew and fresh bread, reminding him he hadn't eaten since morning. Bobby bounded into the room, excitement evident in his face. Mr. Wells, Mama said you're staying for supper. Can I show you my horse after we eat? Beck smiled, charmed by the boy's enthusiasm. I'd like that very much. Dinner was a surprisingly comfortable affair. Bobby dominated the conversation, eager to impress their guest with tales of ranch life and his own small adventures. Rebecca spoke little, but Beck caught her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. After the meal, Bobby led Beck to the barn, proudly showing off his pony, a gentle paint named Patches. The boy's obvious affection for the animal and his careful attention to its needs spoke well of Rebecca's parenting. Your mama's taught you well, Beck commented as Bobby demonstrated how he brushed the pony's mane. Papa taught me too before he died, Bobby said matter-of-factly. He said a man has to take care of his animals before himself. Beck nodded. Your papa was right. "Do you have a wife and children, Mr. Wells?" Bobby asked suddenly. "No," Beck replied. "I never married." Bobby considered this. "Why not?" Beck hesitated, unsure how to answer. "I guess I never found the right woman, or maybe I did, but I wasn't ready to be a husband." Bobby's brow furrowed as he worked through this adult complication. "Mama says sometimes people miss their chances because they're afraid." Beck looked at the boy with new respect. "Your mama is a wise woman. She gets sad sometimes," Bobby continued, stroking his pony's nose. "When she thinks I'm not looking. Papa said it's because her heart was broken before they met." Beck's chest tightened. "Bobby, there you are," Rebecca's voice interrupted from the barn door. "Bobby, it's time for your bath and bed. But Mama, no arguments. Say good night to Mr. Wells." Bobby sighed dramatically but obeyed, offering his hand to Beck with solemn formality. "Good night, Mr. Wells. Will you come back tomorrow?" Beck glanced at Rebecca, unable to read her expression in the dim light of the barn. "If your mother says it's all right." "We'll see," Rebecca said, ushering her son toward the house. "Wait for me on the porch, Beck. I'll be back after I get him settled." Beck watched them go, Bobby chattering happily as they crossed the yard. The boy's innocent revelations weighed on him, evidence of the pain he'd caused that still lingered years later. When Rebecca returned, Beck was seated on the porch steps, staring out at the darkening land. She settled beside him, leaving a careful distance between them. "He's a fine boy," Beck said. "You've done well with him." "Thank you," pride warmed her voice. "He's curious about everything like his father was." "Rebecca," Beck began, turning to face her. "I went into town today. I spoke with the bank manager about Blackwood." Her expression closed. "That's not your concern." "I think it is. Blackwood wants your land for the water rights. He plans to sell to the railroad once he gets it." Rebecca's eyes widened. "Your railroad, not mine specifically, but yes, and I suspect he's growing impatient." "The incidents you mentioned, the cut fences, missing cattle, those were just the beginning." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you're in danger. Blackwood isn't going to give up, and if the law won't stop him." Rebecca stood abruptly. "I am not selling this land. It's all Bobby has left of his father. It's our home." Beck rose to stand beside her. "I'm not suggesting you sell. I'm suggesting you let me help protect what's yours." "And how would you do that?" "You'll be gone in a week, back to your railroad." The words hung between them, a reminder of his transient presence in her life. "I could stay," he said quietly, "if you wanted me to." Rebecca stared at him, disbelief clear in her face. "Stay for how long, Beck? Until the next job calls you away, until the nightmares drive you off again." "You knew about the nightmares?" he asked, surprised. "Your brother wrote to me after you left. He told me you'd come home from the war changed, that you couldn't sleep, couldn't settle, that you'd left to spare me." Her voice hardened. "As if I needed sparing. As if I couldn't have handled whatever demons you brought back with you." Beck felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. "Jacob wrote to you? I didn't know. He thought I deserved an explanation. He was right." Rebecca crossed her arms against the evening chill. "But it was too late by then. The damage was done." "I thought I was protecting you," Beck said. "I came back from that war hollow inside. The things I'd seen, the things I'd done. I didn't want to poison your life with that darkness." "That wasn't your decision to make," Rebecca countered. "I would have helped you through it. We would have faced it together." "I know that now," Beck admitted. "I've spent 10 years regretting the biggest mistake of my life." Rebecca's expression softened slightly. "Why didn't you come back when things got better, when the nightmares eased?" "By then, I'd heard you were married. I thought you were better off without me." He paused. "Were you happy with him?" Rebecca looked away out into the darkness. "Thomas was a good man, kind, dependable. He took care of us." "That's not what I asked." She met his gaze directly. "We had a good marriage, not perfect, not passionate, but good. He loved Bobby. He respected me." She hesitated. "He knew he wasn't my first choice, but he never held that against me." The admission hung in the air between them. "What do you want from me, Beck?" she finally asked. "Why are you really here?" "I don't know," he admitted. "When I heard you were here, I just needed to see you, to know you were all right. And now that you've seen me," Beck moved closer, close enough to catch the faint scent of lavender that he remembered so well. "Now I don't know if I can leave again." Rebecca inhaled sharply. "Don't say things like that, not when you don't mean them." "I do mean it." He reached for her hand, half expecting her to pull away. She didn't. Rebecca, I know I have no right to ask anything of you. But if there's any chance at all that you could forgive me. Forgiveness isn't the issue, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I forgave you years ago, but trust, that's harder to rebuild. Beck nodded, understanding. Then let me earn it back, day by day. Let me prove to you that I'm not the same man who left you. And what about your job, the railroad? There are other jobs, there's only one you. Rebecca's eyes glistened in the moonlight. You can't just waltz back into my life after 10 years and expect everything to be fine. I don't expect that, Beck assured her. I know it won't be easy, I know it might not even be possible, but I have to try. He squeezed her hand gently. Unless you tell me right now that there's no chance that your feelings for me are completely gone. Rebecca's gaze dropped to their joined hands. I wish I could say that, she admitted softly. It would be simpler. Hope flared in Beck's chest. Then give me a chance, one chance to prove myself. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching riders cut through the night. Beck immediately tensed, moving protectively in front of Rebecca. Get inside, he urged. Lock the door. No, she refused, moving to grab the shotgun that stood by the door. This is my home, I'm not hiding. 3 riders emerged from the darkness, stopping at the edge of the yard. Beck recognized Blackwood's men from the previous day, but Blackwood himself was absent. Evening, Mrs. Hanson, called the leader, a scar-faced man with a Texas drawl. Sorry to disturb you so late. What do you want, Jenkins? Rebecca called back, the shotgun steady in her hands. Mr. Blackwood sent us with a message. He's doubling his offer for your property. Says it's his final courtesy before things get difficult. Beck's hand moved to his revolver. You're trespassing. I suggest you deliver your message and ride out. Jenkins laughed, an ugly sound. Well now, looks like the railroad man is playing protector. Mr. Blackwood won't like that. Mr. Blackwood's likes and dislikes don't concern me, Beck replied evenly. Now state your business and be on your way. The tension stretched between them, a confrontation hovering on the edge of violence. Finally, Jenkins spat into the dirt. Mr. Blackwood wants your answer by noon tomorrow, at the bank in town. His gaze shifted to Rebecca. Think carefully, Mrs. Hanson, a woman alone with a child to raise. It's a hard life. Accidents happen. The threat was unmistakable. Beck took a step forward, his hand now resting on his holstered revolver. That sounded like a threat. Want to clarify your meaning? Jenkins grinned, revealing a gold tooth. Just stating facts, mister. This is dangerous country. He tipped his hat mockingly. Evening, madam. The 3 men wheeled their horses around and rode off into the darkness. Beck waited until they were out of sight before turning to Rebecca, who had lowered the shotgun but still gripped it tightly. You're not going to that meeting, he said firmly. I have to, she countered. If I don't show up, they'll just come back here. Then I'm coming with you. Rebecca shook her head. Beck, you don't understand. This isn't your fight. It is now. His expression brooked no argument. I'm not letting you face Blackwood alone. They stood on the porch, the night air cooling around them, the threat of violence still hanging between them and the horizon where Blackwood's men had disappeared. You should stay here tonight, Rebecca said finally, in case they come back. Beck nodded, relief flooding through him at her acceptance of his help. I'll sleep in the barn. There's a spare room, she offered. It was Thomas's study. There's a cot in there. The gesture, small as it was, felt significant, an opening of her home, a tentative extension of trust. Thank you, he said softly. Rebecca turned toward the door, then paused. Beck, yes, if you leave again. She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The warning was clear in her voice. I won't, he promised. Not unless you ask me to go. She nodded once, then disappeared inside. Beck followed, aware that he'd just made a promise he intended to keep, no matter what tomorrow might bring. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the windows of Thomas Hanson's old study. Beck had slept fitfully, aware of Rebecca and Bobby sleeping just down the hall, conscious of being under the same roof with the family that might have been his. He rose early, moving quietly through the house. In the kitchen, he found coffee already brewing and Rebecca at the stove, cooking breakfast. You're up early, she commented without turning. Old habit, he replied, pouring himself a cup of coffee. Mind if I help? She glanced at him, surprise evident in her face. You cook. I've been on my own a long time, had to learn. He moved beside her, taking the spatula she offered. "Go sit, I'll finish the eggs." Rebecca hesitated, then relented, settling at the table with her own coffee. She watched him work, a small furrow between her brows. "What are you thinking?" He asked. "That I don't know you anymore," she admitted. "The Beck I knew couldn't boil water without burning it," he smiled ruefully. "Like I said, people change." "Yes, they do." She sipped her coffee, studying him over the rim of her cup. "What's your plan for today?" "I go with you to meet Blackwood. We make it clear you're not selling and that you're not alone anymore. And then," Beck turned from the stove to face her, "then we see what he does next. You think there will be trouble?" "I know there will," he said grimly. "Men like Blackwood don't give up easily. And you're prepared to face that. For land that isn't yours, people who aren't your family," the question hung between them, loaded with meaning beyond the obvious. "I'm prepared to stand with you," Beck replied carefully, "however long it takes." Rebecca held his gaze, searching for something in his face. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded slightly. "Bobby and I will ride into town after breakfast," she said. "You can follow separately. Better not to advertise your involvement until necessary." Beck agreed, turning back to the stove to hide his disappointment. He'd hoped they might ride in together, present a united front. But Rebecca was right. Strategy mattered when dealing with men like Blackwood. Breakfast was a cheerful affair, with Bobby dominating the conversation again. The boy seemed to have accepted Beck's presence without question, treating him with the easy familiarity of a welcome guest. As they prepared to leave, Rebecca pulled Beck aside. "Be careful in town. Blackwood has eyes everywhere." "I will, you do the same." She nodded, then surprised him by touching his arm briefly before turning away to help Bobby with his jacket. The gesture was small, but Beck felt it like a brand on his skin, the first voluntary contact she'd initiated since his return. Beck waited half an hour after Rebecca and Bobby departed before saddling his horse and heading to town. Silver Creek was busy with the usual morning activities: wagons delivering goods, shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts, cowboys fresh off the trail looking for breakfast and companionship. He spotted Rebecca's wagon outside the bank, but no sign of Blackwood or his men yet. Beck tied his horse a few buildings down, positioning himself where he could watch the bank entrance without being obvious. Around noon, Warren Blackwood arrived, flanked by Jenkins and another gunman. They entered the bank with the confidence of men accustomed to getting their way. Beck waited a few minutes, then followed. Inside, he found Rebecca standing before Blackwood's desk in a small office, her back straight, Bobby at her side. Blackwood looked up with annoyance as Beck entered. "This is a private meeting, Mr. Wells," he said coolly. "I'm here at Mrs. Hanson's request," Beck replied, moving to stand beside Rebecca. Blackwood's eyes narrowed as he looked between them. "I see. Well, this complicates matters somewhat." "Not at all," Rebecca interjected. "My answer is the same as it's always been. The Hanson Ranch is not for sale at any price." Blackwood leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Mrs. Hanson, be reasonable. You're a woman alone, she's not alone," Beck interrupted. Blackwood's gaze hardened. "A temporary arrangement, I'm sure. The railroad doesn't keep its men in one place for long, does it, Wells?" "I've resigned my position," Beck stated, the decision made in that moment. "I'm staying in Silver Creek." Rebecca's head whipped toward him, shock evident in her expression. Blackwood looked equally surprised, though he masked it quickly. "How touching," he sneered. "A reunion of old flames, but sentiment doesn't change the facts. That land will be part of the railroad's route one way or another." "No, it won't," Beck countered. "I've already submitted my final survey report. The route bypasses the Hanson property entirely." Now it was Blackwood's turn to look shocked. "You can't do that. The agreement was for me to determine the most practical route. I've done so." Beck's voice was steel. "The creek access isn't necessary. There's an alternative water source 10 miles south that serves the purpose just as well." Blackwood's face flushed with anger. "This isn't over, Wells, not by a long shot." He turned his glare to Rebecca. "And you'll regret this decision." Bobby moved closer to his mother, his young face troubled by the tension in the room. Rebecca placed a protective hand on his shoulder. "We're done here," she said firmly, turning to leave. Beck followed them out, acutely aware of Blackwood's furious gaze on their backs. Outside, Rebecca rounded on him. You resigned your position. When were you planning to tell me this? I just did, Beck replied, unrepentant. It was the right thing to do. You had no right to make that decision without consulting me, she argued. I don't need you to sacrifice your career for my sake. I didn't do it just for you, Beck countered. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Blackwood is corrupt and I won't be part of his schemes. And now what? You'll stay in Silver Creek and do what exactly? Before Beck could respond, a commotion down the street caught their attention. Smoke was rising from the direction of the general store, and people were running toward it, shouting about fire. Bobby, stay with the wagon, Rebecca instructed, already moving toward the smoke. Beck followed close behind. The general store was engulfed in flames, the fire spreading rapidly to neighboring buildings. The townspeople had formed a bucket brigade, passing water from the horse trough to the burning structures. Beck immediately joined the effort, working alongside men he didn't know to battle the blaze. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Rebecca doing the same, her face set with determination as she passed buckets. For 2 hours, they fought the fire, finally bringing it under control before it could consume the entire block. The general store was a total loss, but they'd saved the adjacent buildings. Exhausted and smoke-stained, Beck found Rebecca sitting on a bench outside the doctor's office where the injured were being treated. She had a bandage around her hand where a falling ember had burned her. You all right? He asked, sitting beside her. She nodded wearily. Just a small burn. Bobby, safe with your wagon. I checked on him a few minutes ago. They sat in silence, watching as the townspeople picked through the debris, assessing the damage. This was no accident, Rebecca said quietly. The fire started right after we left the bank. Beck had reached the same conclusion. Blackwood's warning. A warning of what's to come if I don't sell. Her voice was tight with anger. He's escalating. We need to be prepared, Beck agreed. He won't stop here. Rebecca turned to look at him, her expression resolute. Then we'll be ready for whatever comes next. The unspoken we hung between them, a partnership formed in crisis, a tentative bridge across the years of separation. As they gathered Bobby and prepared to leave town, Beck was acutely aware of eyes watching them, Blackwood's men, monitoring their movements. The message was clear. This was just the beginning. The ride back to the ranch was tense, both of them scanning the horizon for any sign of trouble. Bobby, picking up on their mood, remained unusually quiet in the wagon beside his mother. Back at the ranch, Beck immediately set about checking the property, looking for vulnerabilities. The house was sturdy but isolated, the barn and outbuildings spread out in a way that made them difficult to defend. We should move the horses into the corral nearest the house, he suggested when Rebecca joined him, and bring in any livestock that's valuable. She nodded, already thinking along the same lines. I've sent Bobby to check the creek. If they're going to try anything, cutting off our water would be the first step. You think they'll move this quickly? Blackwood doesn't waste time, she replied grimly. And after today's fire, he's shown his hand. He won't wait for the law to connect him to it. They worked together efficiently, preparing the ranch for a siege neither wanted to acknowledge was coming. As dusk approached, Bobby returned from checking the creek. It's still flowing, Mama, he reported, but I saw tracks. Someone's been there recently. Beck exchanged a look with Rebecca. I'll take the first watch tonight, he said. You and Bobby get some rest. I can help, Bobby insisted. Papa taught me to shoot. Rebecca's face softened. I know, sweetheart, but for now I need you to help by getting a good night's sleep. Tomorrow might be a long day. The boy reluctantly agreed, and after a simple dinner, Rebecca took him inside to prepare for bed. Beck remained on the porch, watching the darkness settle over the land. When Rebecca rejoined him, she carried 2 cups of coffee and a rifle. Bobby's asleep, she said, handing him a cup. He wanted to stay up and help stand guard, Beck smiled. He's brave like his mother. Rebecca settled beside him on the porch step, and stubborn like his mother. That too. They sat in companionable silence, sipping their coffee, the tension of the day slowly easing between them. Did you mean what you said at the bank? Rebecca finally asked. About resigning from the railroad. Yes, Beck replied without hesitation. I've been thinking about it for a while. Today just forced the decision. What will you do now? He turned to look at her, his face half-shadowed in the dim light from the house. That depends. On what? On whether there's a reason for me to stay in Silver Creek. Rebecca met his gaze steadily. Beck, I can't make promises. Too much has happened. I'm not asking for promises, he said gently. Just possibility. She was quiet for a long moment, considering. There's possibility, she finally admitted, but it's complicated. I have Bobby to think about, this land to protect. I understand that. Do you? Because walking back into my life means accepting all of it, my son, this ranch, the life I've built without you. Beck set down his coffee cup, turning fully toward her. Rebecca, I want all of it. I want to be part of your life however you'll let me. I want to know your son to help protect this land. I want to make up for the years I lost through my own foolishness. The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. Rebecca studied his face in the moonlight, searching for any sign of hesitation or doubt. She found none. I believe you mean that, she said softly. But intentions aren't enough. I need to know you won't leave again when things get difficult. I won't, he promised. I've spent 10 years running from the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm done running. Rebecca's expression softened, a vulnerability showing through that she'd kept carefully hidden until now. I never stopped loving you, she confessed, the words barely audible. Even when I hated you for leaving, even when I married Thomas. That's what makes this so frightening. Beck reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. I never stopped loving you either, not for a single day. The moment hung between them, fragile and precious. Then, slowly, Rebecca leaned toward him. Beck met her halfway, their lips touching in a kiss that was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. When they parted, Rebecca's eyes were bright with unshed tears. We need to take this slowly, she whispered. For Bobby's sake, for my sake. As slow as you need, Beck agreed, his heart fuller than it had been in years. The sound of a horse approaching broke the moment. Beck was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. Rebecca stood beside him, her own weapon ready. A lone rider emerged from the darkness, raising a hand in greeting. As he drew closer, Beck recognized the sheriff's badge glinting in the moonlight. Evening, Mrs. Hanson, called Sheriff Thompson, dismounting at the edge of the yard. Hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Sheriff, Rebecca replied, lowering her rifle slightly. What brings you out here so late? Thompson approached the porch, his weathered face serious in the lamplight. Heard about the trouble in town today. Thought I should check on you, given Blackwood's interest in your property. Beck studied the lawman, trying to gauge his allegiance. You think Blackwood was behind the fire? Thompson's gaze shifted to Beck. You must be Wells. Heard you were back in town. He removed his hat, running a hand through thinning hair. As for Blackwood, I can't prove anything yet, but I've got my suspicions. Will you act on those suspicions? Rebecca pressed. The sheriff sighed. Mrs. Hanson, I'll be straight with you. Blackwood has a lot of influence in this county. He's got the mayor and half the town council in his pocket. Makes my job complicated. So you're saying you won't help, Beck concluded, anger edging his voice. I'm saying I'll do what I can within the law, Thompson corrected. But you should be prepared for trouble. Blackwood doesn't give up easily. We've noticed, Rebecca said dryly. Thompson replaced his hat. I'll increase patrols in this area, but my resources are limited. Just be careful. Both of you. He looked between them meaningfully. Blackwood doesn't like losing, and he especially doesn't like losing to outsiders. After the sheriff departed, Beck and Rebecca returned to their vigil on the porch, the brief moment of connection between them now overshadowed by the sheriff's warning. We're on our own, Rebecca said, stating what they both already knew. Beck nodded grimly. Then we'll handle it ourselves. The night passed without incident, but neither of them slept much, taking turns keeping watch. As dawn broke, Beck surveyed the property, alert for any sign of intrusion. Everything appeared normal, which only heightened his suspicion. Rebecca joined him outside, looking as tired as he felt. Anything? Nothing, he replied. That's what worries me, she nodded, understanding. Blackwood's planning something. He won't rush in with guns blazing, that's not his style. He'll try to force our hand some other way. The water, Beck suggested, or the road access. Cut you off, make the ranch unworkable. Possibly, she agreed. Or he might try something in town first, make it difficult for me to sell my cattle or buy supplies. Their speculation was interrupted by Bobby running from the house, his young face alight with excitement despite the tension around him. "Mama, Mr. Beck, can we check the new foal this morning? She should be strong enough to stand now." Rebecca smiled, the first genuine smile Beck had seen since the confrontation in town. "After breakfast, sweetheart, and after your lessons." Bobby groaned dramatically but didn't argue, rushing back inside to prepare for the day. Beck watched him go, struck by how resilient children could be in the face of adult concerns. "He's a good boy," he commented. "The best," Rebecca agreed softly. "He deserves better than to grow up in the middle of a range war." "That won't happen," Beck promised. "We'll resolve this before it comes to that." The day passed in a strange mixture of normalcy and vigilance. Rebecca conducted Bobby's lessons in the morning while Beck repaired a section of fence that had been needing attention. In the afternoon, they all rode out together to check the creek and the grazing cattle. The land was beautiful in the autumn light, golden grasses waving in the breeze, the distant mountains purple against the horizon. Beck could see why Rebecca fought so hard to keep it. This wasn't just property. It was a legacy, a future for her son. As they rode, Beck found himself watching Rebecca and Bobby together, the easy affection between them, the way she patiently answered his endless questions. He could see himself fitting into this life, becoming part of their family. The thought both elated and terrified him. They were returning to the ranch when Beck spotted the dust cloud approaching from the direction of town. Several riders moving fast. "Rebecca," he called, pointing. She saw it immediately, her expression hardening. "Bobby, ride ahead to the house, fast as you can." "But Mama, now, Bobby," she insisted, her tone brooking no argument. The boy galloped toward home, glancing back worriedly. Beck and Rebecca positioned themselves side by side, waiting as the riders approached. It was Jenkins and 4 others, all armed, their expressions grim beneath the dust of the trail. "Afternoon, Mrs. Hanson," Jenkins called, reining in his horse a few yards away. "Mr. Wells." "State your business, Jenkins," Rebecca replied coldly. "Mr. Blackwood sent me with a message and some papers." He reached into his jacket, pulling out an envelope. "Seems there's been some confusion about the property line between your land and his. According to these surveys, the creek actually runs through Blackwood land." Beck's jaw tightened. "That's impossible. The Hanson deed clearly shows the creek within their property." Jenkins shrugged. "Not according to the county records filed this morning. Seems there was an error in the original survey. Mr. Blackwood is generously offering to allow you access to the water for a fee, of course." "This is absurd," Rebecca snapped. "My husband and I have the original deed. The creek has always been part of this property." "Well, madam, Mr. Blackwood suggests you take it up with the judge next time he's in town, which would be, let me think, 6 weeks from now." Jenkins smiled unpleasantly. "In the meantime, anyone caught taking water from Blackwood property will be considered trespassing." Beck moved his horse forward, his patience wearing thin. "Tell Blackwood his fraudulent documents won't stand up in court, and if any of his men set foot on Hanson land, they'll regret it." Jenkins's hand drifted to his holster. Big talk from a man outnumbered. "I wouldn't be so sure about that," came a new voice. All heads turned to see a group of riders approaching from the direction of the ranch. Bobby led them, seated proudly on his pony. Behind him rode Sheriff Thompson and 3 deputies, all armed. Jenkins and his men suddenly looked less confident. "Problem here?" Thompson asked, his hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. "No problem, Sheriff," Jenkins replied, his tone noticeably more respectful. "Just delivering some papers for Mr. Blackwood." "I see." Thompson held out his hand. "I'll take those papers. County business should go through proper channels." Reluctantly, Jenkins handed over the envelope. Thompson glanced at the contents, his expression darkening. "These documents appear to contradict county records I reviewed just this morning," he commented. Interesting timing. Jenkins shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "I just deliver messages, Sheriff." "Then deliver this one to Blackwood," Thompson said firmly. "Any attempt to falsify property records is a criminal offense, and any attempt to prevent Mrs. Hanson from accessing water on her legal property will be met with the full force of the law." The sheriff's unexpected support left Jenkins floundering. He glanced at his companions, clearly reassessing his options. "We'll be going now," he finally said, turning his horse. "But this isn't over." "No," Beck agreed quietly, "it isn't." They watched as Blackwood's men rode away, the confrontation diffused for the moment but far from resolved. "Thank you, Sheriff," Rebecca said when they were gone. "I didn't expect your support." Thompson looked uncomfortable. "I don't take sides, Mrs. Hanson. But I don't tolerate fraud or intimidation in my county." He tipped his hat. "You folks be careful. Blackwood won't give up easily." As the sheriff and his deputies departed, Bobby rode up to his mother, his face alight with pride. "I did good, didn't I, Mama? I went for the sheriff just like Mr. Beck taught me." Rebecca pulled her son into a fierce hug. "You did wonderfully, sweetheart. Very brave." Beck's heart swelled at the boy's words. He'd spent the morning showing Bobby the fastest route to town and what to say if trouble came. The boy had remembered every detail. "You did exactly right, Bobby," he confirmed. "Quick thinking and good riding." Bobby beamed under the praise. As they headed back to the ranch, Beck rode beside Rebecca, their horses close enough that their legs occasionally brushed. "That was good thinking," she said quietly. "Teaching Bobby the route to town. Just a precaution," Beck replied. "He's a smart boy, takes after his mother." Rebecca smiled, the expression warming her tired face. "He seems to have taken a shine to you. The feeling's mutual." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the confrontation with Jenkins receding as they contemplated the broader implications. "Blackwood's getting desperate," Beck observed. "Falsifying documents is a risky move." "He must be under pressure from the railroad," Rebecca suggested. "With your survey report changing the route, he needs this land more than ever," Beck nodded, guilt washing over him. "I've brought this trouble to your door." "No," Rebecca countered firmly. "Blackwood was causing problems long before you returned. If anything, your presence has helped. The sheriff might not have been so quick to intervene otherwise. Still, we need to be prepared. Blackwood will try again, and next time he might not be so direct." That evening, after Bobby was asleep, Beck and Rebecca sat at the kitchen table, planning their next move. The lamp between them cast warm light over spread-out maps of the property. "The creek is our most vulnerable point," Beck pointed out, tracing the waterway with his finger. "If Blackwood can't claim it legally, he might try to divert it or contaminate it somehow." Rebecca nodded grimly. "We should post watches, day and night." "I was thinking the same thing, and we should bring in help, trusted hands who can guard the property when we can't." "There are a few men in town who worked for Thomas," Rebecca said thoughtfully. "They might be willing." They continued planning well into the night, their heads bent close over the maps, occasionally looking up to find the other's gaze. Despite the circumstances, Beck felt a connection growing between them, a partnership forged in adversity. When they finally rose to seek their respective beds, Beck caught Rebecca's hand. "We'll get through this," he promised. "Together." She squeezed his hand in return. "Together," she agreed, the word carrying weight beyond their immediate situation. The next week passed in a strange rhythm of vigilance and normalcy. Beck sent telegrams to contacts from his railroad days, seeking information about Blackwood's dealings and potential leverage against him. Rebecca hired 3 former ranch hands to help patrol the property, particularly the creek. Bobby adapted to the new routine with resilience, turning the increased security into a game of cowboys and outlaws. He shadowed Beck constantly, soaking up knowledge about tracking, shooting, and ranch work. For Beck, these days with Rebecca and Bobby felt like a glimpse of the life he might have had, the life he still hoped for. Each morning brought them closer, small moments of connection building a bridge across the years of separation. He was checking fence lines with Bobby one afternoon when the boy asked the question Beck had been dreading. "Mr. Beck, were you and Mama sweethearts before my papa?" Beck hesitated, unsure how to answer. "What makes you ask that?" Bobby shrugged, focusing intently on the fence wire he was holding. "I heard Sarah telling Mama that you two were engaged once. Is that true?" "Yes," Beck admitted. "A long time ago." "What happened?" Beck sighed, crouching to meet the boy's eyes. "I made a mistake, Bobby, a big one. I left when I shouldn't have." Bobby considered this with a child's directness. "But you came back." "Yes, I came back. Are you going to marry Mama now? The question caught Beck off guard. That would be up to your mama, and to you too, I suppose. Bobby nodded solemnly. I think it would be okay. You make her smile again. Beck's heart constricted. I'm glad to hear that. Papa would want her to be happy, Bobby continued with the certainty of a child. He told me to take care of her, but I think maybe you could help. Beck placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. I'd like to help take care of both of you if you'll let me. Bobby smiled, the matter settled in his mind. Good. Can we check the creek now? I want to see if the beaver dam is getting bigger. Beck laughed, grateful for the boy's simple acceptance. Lead the way, partner. They were returning to the ranch when they spotted a wagon approaching from town. As it drew closer, Beck recognized Sarah Donovan at the reins, her expression urgent. Beck. She called as soon as she was within earshot. Thank goodness I found you. Is Rebecca at the house? She should be, Beck replied, concern rising at Sarah's tone. What's wrong? There's trouble in town. Blackwood's called a meeting of the town council. He's claiming eminent domain for the railroad, says they need to seize the Hanson property for the public good. Beck's blood ran cold. He can't do that. The railroad already accepted my alternative route. Sarah shook her head. He's got some fancy lawyer from Denver arguing that your route was rejected. The council's voting this afternoon. Take Bobby to the house, Beck instructed. Tell Rebecca what's happening. I'll ride to town immediately. I want to come with you, Bobby protested. Not this time, partner, Beck said firmly. I need you to protect your mother and the ranch. Can you do that for me? The boy nodded reluctantly, understanding the seriousness of the situation. Beck mounted his horse, spurring it toward town at a gallop. His mind raced faster than his horse's hooves. Blackwood must have pulled strings with railroad executives, perhaps offering bribes to override Beck's survey. If the town council voted to support the eminent domain claim, Rebecca could lose everything. Silver Creek was buzzing with activity when he arrived. A crowd had gathered outside the town hall, where the council meeting was already underway. Beck pushed through, entering the packed meeting room just as Blackwood's lawyer was concluding his presentation. Clear benefit to the entire region, the lawyer was saying. The railroad's access to water is essential for steam operations, and Mrs. Hanson's unreasonable refusal to sell threatens the economic future of Silver Creek. Beck strode down the center aisle, all eyes turning to him. That's a lie, he declared loudly. The railroad has already approved an alternative route that doesn't require the Hanson property. Blackwood, seated at the front of the room, turned with a cold smile. Mr. Wells, how convenient that you've joined us. Perhaps you'd like to explain to the council why you suddenly changed your professional recommendation after becoming personally involved with Mrs. Hanson. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Beck stood his ground, addressing the 5 council members directly. My survey report was submitted before I knew Mrs. Hanson had any connection to the property in question. The alternative route is actually more efficient for the railroad's long-term operations. That's not what the railroad's board of directors believes, Blackwood's lawyer interjected, holding up an official-looking document. I have here a letter from the chief engineer stating that your alternative was rejected as impractical. Beck stepped forward, extending his hand. May I see that letter? The lawyer hesitated, glancing at Blackwood, who nodded almost imperceptibly. The document was passed to Beck, who scanned it quickly, his suspicions growing. This signature is forged, he stated flatly. I've worked with Chief Engineer Sullivan for 5 years. This isn't his handwriting. Blackwood laughed dismissively. A desperate claim from a desperate man. The council shouldn't be swayed by unfounded accusations. Then perhaps they'll be swayed by this, came a new voice from the doorway. All heads turned to see Rebecca entering, Bobby at her side, and behind them, a distinguished older man in a tailored suit. Mr. Sullivan, Beck said, surprised. I didn't expect to see you here. The chief engineer of the Western Railroad strode forward, his expression stern. When I received your telegram about potential forgery of railroad documents, I decided this matter required my personal attention. He turned to the council. Gentlemen, I am James Sullivan, chief engineer of the Western Railroad. I can confirm that Mr. Wells's alternative route was approved by our board last week. Any document suggesting otherwise is fraudulent. Blackwood's face darkened with anger. This is absurd. I have assurances from the railroad's president himself, former president, Sullivan corrected. Mr. Hamilton resigned last week amid allegations of financial impropriety. Perhaps you were unaware. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Beck moved to stand beside Rebecca, their shoulders touching in silent support. Furthermore, Sullivan continued, the railroad has no interest in pursuing eminent domain claims that would damage our reputation with the very communities we seek to serve. Mr. Wells's route is not only acceptable but preferable from an engineering standpoint. The council members exchanged glances, clearly reassessing their position. The mayor, a portly man with a nervous demeanor, cleared his throat. In light of this new information, I move that we table the eminent domain discussion indefinitely. Seconded, said another council member quickly. Blackwood rose, his face livid. This isn't over, he snarled, storming from the room, his lawyer scurrying after him. As the meeting dissolved into excited conversation, Beck turned to Rebecca. How did you know to bring Sullivan? I didn't, she admitted. He arrived at the ranch right after you left. Sarah and I decided to bring him directly here. Sullivan approached them, extending his hand to Rebecca. Mrs. Hanson, a pleasure to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances. Thank you for coming, she replied, shaking his hand firmly. Your timing was perfect. Not at all. I've been meaning to speak with Beckham anyway. Sullivan turned to Beck. Your resignation letter was quite illuminating, made me take a closer look at some of our recent land acquisitions. Beck nodded, understanding the implication. And what did you find? Enough to warrant a full investigation, Sullivan said grimly. Blackwood isn't the only one who's been manipulating property deals for personal gain. The new president has authorized me to clean house. What does this mean for Mrs. Hanson's property? Beck asked, the question foremost in his mind. Sullivan smiled. It means the Western Railroad has no claim or interest in the Hanson Ranch, and it means, Beckham, that there might still be a position for you with us if you're interested. One that would allow you to remain in Silver Creek. Beck glanced at Rebecca, whose expression revealed nothing of her thoughts. Thank you, sir. I'll consider it. As they left the town hall, Bobby running ahead to share the news with Sarah, Beck and Rebecca walked side by side through the crowded street. Is it really over? She asked quietly. Blackwood seemed quite determined. With the railroad backing out, he's lost his leverage, Beck replied. But you're right to be cautious. Men like Blackwood are dangerous when cornered. What will you do about Sullivan's offer? The question hung between them, loaded with implications for their future. That depends, Beck said carefully. On what? He stopped, turning to face her fully. On whether there's a reason for me to stay in Silver Creek. Rebecca met his gaze, the wall around her heart visibly crumbling. I think there might be, she said softly. If you're certain this time. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Beck replied, taking her hand in his. I love you, Rebecca. I never stopped. If you'll give me another chance, I swear I'll spend the rest of my life making up for the years we lost. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. It won't be easy. There's Bobby to consider and the ranch. I know. And I want all of it, you, Bobby, the ranch, the hard work and the joy that comes with it. I want the life we should have had 10 years ago. Rebecca squeezed his hand, her decision evident in her eyes before she spoke. Then stay, Beckham Wells. Stay and help me build that life. The sunset painted the Hanson Ranch in hues of gold and amber as Beck sat on the porch steps, watching Bobby exercise his pony in the corral. 6 months had passed since the confrontation with Blackwood, and much had changed. Blackwood himself had left town under a cloud of scandal when Sullivan's investigation revealed the extent of his fraudulent dealings. His properties, including the water rights he'd so coveted, were being sold at auction. Beck had accepted Sullivan's offer of a position overseeing railroad operations in Silver Creek, a job that kept him close to home while utilizing his skills. The alternative route was under construction, bringing prosperity to the region without displacing established ranchers. Most importantly, Beck and Rebecca had begun building a life together. Slowly at first, with Beck courting her properly this time Sunday dinners, rides across the ranch, quiet evenings on the porch after Bobby was asleep. The boy had accepted Beck into their lives with the simple grace of childhood, quickly coming to view him as a father figure. 2 months ago, Beck had proposed not with grand gestures, but with a simple question asked while they mended fences together. Rebecca had said yes without hesitation. The years of pain finally healed between them. The sound of the door opening behind him drew Beck from his thoughts. Rebecca emerged, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Beck before settling beside him on the steps. "Bobby's getting better with that pony," she observed, watching her son with pride. "He is," Beck agreed. "He's a natural horseman, like his mother." Rebecca smiled, leaning against his shoulder comfortably. "I got a letter from Sarah today. She and the new doctor are officially courting." "About time," Beck commented. "He's been mooning over her since he arrived in town." "Speaking of time," Rebecca said, a hint of nervousness in her voice, "have you given any more thought to when we should have the wedding?" Beck set down his coffee cup, turning to face her. "I'd marry you tomorrow if you'd have me, but I thought you wanted to wait until spring." "I did," she admitted, "but circumstances have changed." Beck's brow furrowed in confusion, then cleared as understanding dawned. "Rebecca, are you?" She nodded, a blush coloring her cheeks. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have a baby." Joy surged through Beck, so intense it nearly overwhelmed him. He pulled Rebecca into his arms, kissing her with all the love he'd carried for her through the years of separation. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our baby." "Our family," she corrected gently, glancing at Bobby, who was now waving at them from the corral. "The one we were always meant to have." Beck held her close, marveling at how life had brought them full circle back to each other, back to love, back to the future they'd once planned. 10 years of silence had ended the moment he'd spoken her name again, and now they had a lifetime of words ahead of them. "I love you, Rebecca," he said, the simple truth that had sustained him through years of darkness. "And I love you, Beckham Wells," she replied, her voice carrying the promise of all their tomorrows. "Always have, always will." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the land in deepening shades of purple and gold, Beck knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. The journey had been long and difficult, but the destination, this woman, this family, this life, was worth every step. Bobby ran toward them, calling excitedly about his pony's newest trick. Beck and Rebecca rose together to meet him, their hands intertwined, their hearts beating as one. The future stretched before them, bright with promise, rich with love, the second chance they'd both been waiting for.